Right, let's just give it a couple of minutes for people to join. Welcome everybody if you're already here. Really looking forward to getting this webinar underway today. Just going to be a couple of minutes and we'll do some introductions, get to know everybody, and then we'll jump into the topics that are going to be, around the front end ecosystem, talking about these guys' favorite web stacks, and more. It's going to be exciting. Right, we've got people joining, so this is looking good. Fantastic. Well, guys, I'll give it 30 more seconds and we'll jump in and get introed. Apologies if you can't see Nikki. Hopefully you can hear him. We had a few issues with the cameras, but the main thing is we can hear what he has to say. So you're all going to miss his wonderful Bond villain cat sat in a chair, though. So, but we've seen it. All right, guys, I'm going to kick it off. So before we kind of get into introductions today, of my fantastic guests that I've got on, I'm your host, Sam Williamson. I work for the Evolution Recruitment as part of the Nordics team here, and today we're the ones bringing you the webinar on what's going to be the best open source front-end software in 2023. I'm going to work our way around the room. I want to introduce you to a fantastic panel we've put together. I'm going to start off with Kim. Tell us a bit more about yourself, mate.
Thank you, Sam, and thanks for having me on your podcast. So, well, my name is Kim Johansen. I work as a senior front-end engineer at Rare Wine, a company dealing with trading and investing of valuable wines here in Aalborg, Denmark. The past 2 years, I have been working at a company called Saxo, doing online, gambling slot machine games. Where my specialty has mainly been in WebGL and the engine programming in Java and JavaScript and Clojure. I have a couple of years of background in the gaming industry as well, like AAA games. And I have recently, in the past 3-4 years, moved on to front web development because I think it's a little bit more easy to find jobs. I think in the games industry you had to move a lot. I started to prioritize my family and my home more. So yeah, today I'm actually working a lot on making a front-end component library for all our internal tools and our homepage and stuff like that. And that is made in the most recent version of React 18. So that is my preferred stack. I would say React together with something like Recoil, state management. I even know that React came along with some hooks that can, in some ways, even maybe eliminate the need for those state management libraries these days. But yeah, it's evolving a lot. Even within the React community, I think there's a lot of stuff going on. Even the most recent versions of React comes with a lot of new cool features, also some breaking changes now and then. So yeah, I think it's really interesting.
Thank you, Kim, and we know who's cool. If we rare wines, I'm a wine lover myself, so we might have to have a conversation after this call. Jonas, we'll come to you next. Let us know who you are, what you're working on right now.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Well, yeah, as said, my name is Jonas. I am currently working on, or I'm a freelancer, and I've been doing so for about 2 years or so. I do technical architect roles in full stack development, primarily doing Angular and C#, and some Kubernetes stuff, which I find really interesting, and doing a bit of projects to the side with so that I can learn new stuff and whatnot. Doing that in React and Kubernetes currently. Currently, I'm sitting at Ørsted, the big Danish energy corporation, doing some front end stuff for them, and it's really nice working with a great team over there. Hopefully, I can have a few guys in here. Send my regards from here.
Thank you, Jonas. Mikkel, tell us a bit more.
Yeah, I've been a developer since 2014, sort of in various roles, but mostly mostly sort of a web app full stacker with a little bit of tilt towards front end. Sometimes full-time contracts, sometimes startup, sometimes a couple of part-times, or like a full-time plus a part-time. Recently finished a contract with a company in California. And I'm now sort of in the closing negotiations for a contract via a US consultancy for a bank in Taiwan. There's like some NDA stuff that I have to sign before I know much. So unfortunately, I cannot say too much about what it involves. Sort of interestingly, when we sort of get to discuss our favorite stacks a little bit deeper, I've been using Rescript back when it was called Reason since 2017, and I'm going to be, like, if I get the chance, banging the drum a little bit for that direction.
Thank you, Mikkel, and best of luck with the new opportunity coming up. You're keeping us in the dark a little bit there. Talking about being in the dark, Nikki, we can't see you, but tell us a bit more about yourself.
Yeah, apologies for the missing camera. I'm not sure what happened, but
Not a problem.
yeah, as Sam said, just imagine a very handsome Bond villain, and then I think it's spot on. But yeah, my name is Nikki, and I've been freelancing for 12 years. I do mostly front end, I've been working for lots of Danish big enterprises, but also some smaller startups. For the past 6 years or so, I've come to sort of specialize within fintech and some blockchain. So at the moment, I am working with a Danish staking provider called Nordisk, where I'm doing some UX and front-end work, and I'm also doing a non-blockchain related project for Polkadot through a German branding agency, which is called Koto. And in terms of stack, I work, of course, with JavaScript and Typescript. And I prefer to work with React, Next.js, Node, what have you. Yeah, I think that's it. I also have a bunch of unfinished side projects that I'm trying to spend my time on. And otherwise, I'm just chilling here with my Bond cats in Copenhagen.
Fantastic. Well, guys, thank you for letting us know all who you are. Now we've got a good idea, and it sounds like we've got a great mix of both experience in the front end, the back end, and across that web stack. So I'm really looking forward to kind of sinking our teeth into the questions today. Let's go into the first topic, talking about everything around the front end ecosystem. I know, speaking with these guys before in preparation for this webinar, there was a couple of different opinions in how it's looking out there. But let us know what you think in the comments as we go, and hopefully we can answer any questions towards the end. But Kim, I'm going to come to you first. I know you spoke about the front end ecosystem becoming more fragmented. Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, so one of the reasons I think this is really interesting to talk about is that when I think back in even 2009, 2010, where I started, experimenting with JavaScript and web development, I still remember the days where stuff like NPM and React and Angular and all these very complex libraries were not really a thing like that. JavaScript was more a way to make animations and some simple stuff on the web pages, because more or less these browser implementations of the JavaScript interpreter was not really that efficient. So I have basically been watching JavaScript evolve from what it used to be and what it has become today. And one of the things that I've been noticing is that JavaScript has turned into a complete ecosystem. because we have both seen that JavaScript has evolved not only on the front end, but using Node also evolved onto becoming, a really effective tool for doing backend stuff. And we have also seen even, desktop applications being done in JavaScript using, Electron. So I think that JavaScript has become, not only a tool for scripting browsers and web pages, but it has actually turned into something that we can use across the board, from web development to backend server development, and even onto desktop applications, and even to some extent, being used as a scripting languages for modern AAA games. So in the way that when we look at the front end, now we're talking front end right now, and even on the front end side of JavaScript, I think it's really interesting to watch how JavaScript is not only being used to run in the browser and on the back end, but one of the things that I've been spending a lot of time on is also on the tool chain. So let's say, for example, that I want to make a web page. I might need some tools for doing translations. I need some tools for static images. I need some tools for optimizing my JavaScript that's going to run on the browser. So in web development, we have a lot of use cases where it's not just enough to just have a compiler. We need a lot of different tools for a lot of different jobs that we do in the development process. And that's where I think that JavaScript and nowadays TypeScript really excels, is that you can not only use this language and all these different code packages on the front end and the back end, but also on the tool chain. And that's where I think that JavaScript really differs from, let's say, C++, the C++ ecosystem, or with the .NET, where you usually have some provided tools for handling this kind of stuff. When we talk about fragmentation, one of the things I find very difficult on the front end these days is that especially if you start up a new project, you have so many different stacks to choose from. You might go for, in the front end, you might go for React, you might go for Solid.js, Vue, or Angular, or whatever. And if you're not choosing Angular, you might also need to figure out some way of managing your state. You might have to find some kind of libraries to handle, communication with the backend. You might just do simple, REST, queries, but you might also use something like GraphQL. So in my case, for example, when I'm using for one of my hobby projects, I'm using React for the front end. I'm using Prisma for the back end. I'm using Apollo on the server side. I'm using Apollo on the client side to do GraphQL communications. So there's a lot of different libraries and technologies involved today in making the complete package of a web service. And choosing between these can sometimes be difficult, because not only we have so many to choose from, they are also evolving very rapidly, in my opinion, all the time. So even from React for a couple of years ago and React today, we have turned away from the regular class-based components into JSX components. So the whole way of using these libraries also change over time. So not only choosing, the right stack in terms of which libraries to use, we also have to determine, which versions of these libraries we're going to use. And in the cases where we're not starting up a new project and coming maybe into some kind of commercial existing solution, there might be, a very specific version that they're using of these libraries that we need to know in order to just jump into that project. And that's one of the things in the front end that I find very hard these days, that if you go onto an existing project, you might end up with that they're using Angular version 8 or something, or React version 15. And then you have to think of, oh, did they use hooks in that version of React? If they didn't, how? I have to, rewind back in time and think, how did I do React components back then? That's really one of the things that I think makes it hard as a front ender today, especially when you're a junior or something, that you really need to consider which kind of stacks you want to learn and which stacks you want to specialize in.
Definitely, and I know we spoke about this before. Jonas made a good point when I spoke to him, saying about how many updates there are and all these different texts and web stacks you can use.
Yeah,
Jonas,
for
do you want to
sure.
tell us a bit more?
Yeah, for sure. If I can just jump in here. It's just I'm coming from a background working purely with enterprise IT stuff. So that's my point of view, and that's what I'm going to be speaking from today. So keep that in mind. But I do think in front end there is a lot. The roadmap for each package and each framework you're using is so much tighter compared to backend technologies, and I think that's really worth looking into if you're building an enterprise architect or enterprise application that's going to be used and maintained over the years. You have to keep an eye out for, okay, how much maintenance do I have to do to keep this application alive and for my developers to being able to work on it. If we take the example of Angular.js, or sorry, just Angular now, they have a release schedule so stating 2 major releases a year. So that's 2 times a year. Basically, you have to do I wouldn't say complete upgrade because they have very good tooling to upgrading, but it's just worth keeping in mind whenever you pick your framework that they differ a lot in terms of maintenance that you have to do across the different frameworks you can choose out there, and packages as well, very much indeed, because packages, they go deprecated left and right. So keep an eye out for that whenever you pick.
Has anybody got anything to add? Yeah, Kim agrees. Mikkel, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, so my experience has been with smaller clients where there's either been freedom to sort of choose my own stack, or I've been lucky enough to be in a place where like we haven't been on React 15 or like earlier versions than that. There's been some cases where like we don't like particularly like how this ORM, like how we're using that, and then but because we're focusing on like delivering some feature, then like some tech dev recruitment, and then you do sort of get into, oh, we're actually like 2 major versions behind, and instead of just doing the upgrade path from like say if you want React 15, right, and now React 18 is out, you're not just upgrading from 15 to 18, you're sort of going through, okay, then I guess to follow like the path that doesn't break anything, first to go from 15 to 16, and then go 16 to 17, and sort of all the way up. And I think that fragmentation, I think is I think is more of a risk on projects where you have like many more stakeholders or bigger development teams than most things that I've been on. Also, because it's been sort of relatively manageable code bases, or like so we've been stakeholders and like all the different services interacting with them. But definitely run into the crap, we didn't update for like a year, and now we're a bit behind, and like which feature are we pausing while we go through the update.
Just a note on that as well. Just whenever you pick stuff, it's also important that you have to not only convince your team that, okay, we need to upgrade this stuff. You also have to convince a client saying, okay, we need to upgrade this stuff. A client may come back, okay, so what does it bring us? And as a developer, how do you explain what an upgrade brings a product? Like what can you do? It's like, what does this specific upgrade bring you? Okay, you make it easier for us. That's it. You don't get anything in the UI. You don't make it. Sometimes it gets quicker. Yeah, that's true. But keep in mind that whenever you sell a framework to a client, you also have to say, okay, or it's important to keep in mind saying, okay, you can pick this one. We can deliver an application really quickly, but you have to bear in mind that there are more maintenance costs on this set framework compared to others. Yeah, so just worth them whenever you propose frameworks to a client.
And also, I guess that you need to propose solutions that are actually maintainable in the future as well, and that they are mature and supported. So usually, if it has a good community backing behind it, then it's most likely a safe bet. But if it's some very fancy framework that someone made made in their basement and no one's really using, I mean, that might be fun for you, but you never know, like if it's going to be maintained in a year from now.
Kim, you've got something to add?
Yeah, so I also think that today I work with a kind of a smaller company. We're only 20 people at the office, and I've also noticed, when the HR department is searching for people, I think it's also important to sometimes think about that if we just upgrade to the newest framework, or another framework, whatever you like to do, you also have to consider, can we find people, if we need more people on the team to maintain this? Are there enough people out there who know how to use the newest version of React? I think that's a really valid point as well.
Mikkel?
Yeah, this is building on Jonas's point, kind of so what is it that switching to this package, upgrading this package gives an that it usually for a client can be sort of very intangible, because the end thing that's there still looks the same and sort of works the same. And I think a lot of this is about what gives what is a better developer experience, what gives you better types, what makes sure that you catch bugs during so that there's a whole JavaScript versus TypeScript versus Rescript debate, stuff like GraphQL, where you're not delivering delivering a different feature set for the product, but you're kind of delivering at least sort of a promise of maintainability and velocity, that you spend I don't know, let's say a month switching a framework, and then if you initially had planned to do this amount of features over 6 months, then pay a month up front, and then maybe in the 6 you can maybe deliver those features in 4 months. That's at least the kind of argument that you're making.
Excellent. Well, what I want to do is kind of flip it a little bit, move away from fragmentation and onto a point that Nikki made around about outside of enterprises that you do front-end developers and now going more into back-end or DevOps and these even more specialized fields such as mobile side of things, blockchain and machine learning. These are all being taken on by these front-end developers. Does this mean that JavaScript is king? Nikki?
Yeah, absolutely. I think JavaScript is king because it can literally run almost anywhere. Like Kim also mentioned earlier, you can run it in the browser, you can run it in the server, on the phone, in integrated devices, blockchain, whatever. So I think it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And I also think that the scope of JavaScript has broadened so much for the past 10, 12 years while I've been working. So it also means that the sort of the title of front end developer becomes kind of blurred, because suddenly you have front end developers doing backend work or mobile work, because why not? Then they don't have to rely on others. I think it's definitely something that we see more and more, and I think it's been a long process, and I don't think it's going to churn again. Obviously, in enterprises, then they're a bit harder to change. So you usually have dedicated backend developers and DevOps engineers and such. I read an article a few years ago by Brad Frost, where he touches upon that there's a front of the front end and a back of the front end, where some front enders they mainly work on UI and collaborate with designers and such, and then there's the back of the front, which is still front end developers, but they are working more on business logic, server stuff, DevOps stuff, and those kind of things. I think it's something that, it just means that the front end itself is a very broad definition. And I also think that developers themselves, they are on a personal journey. And what I see is that as front-end developers gain seniority and experience, they move towards the back of the front end, where they are digging a little bit deeper into frameworks and such, and not just pasting divs together, so to speak. Not that there's anything wrong with that, because I think there are very brilliant front-end developers that just does amazing UI, and that's not for everyone. That requires a lot of skill.
Kim, did you have something to add there? Did I see a hand go up?
Yes. So in the company I work with today, the backend is a .NET solution. In my spare time, I have a project going where the backend is Node.js based. And I just noticed one of the very common use cases that I experience is sometimes we have, doubt whether some kind of non-critical business logic should be on the back or the front end. And in our case here, we had some logic going on the front end at the moment where we decided that it was too critical to be on the front end, so we wanted to move it to the back end. And in that case, we actually needed to rewrite some code because we needed to translate this kind of JavaScript, business logic into, C# so it could run on the back end. And that's one of the examples where I think that having Node.js as your backend, it really excels because you can basically have a common library of a lot of different utilities and business logic functions that you could basically reuse both on the front end and the backend where it makes sense. But also one of the advantages is that in our case right here, we have some developers that have only been developing in .NET, in C#. And isn't really that much familiar with JavaScript and the whole NPM yarn ecosystem. And what I really find nice about working in one ecosystem is that it's easier for people to move between front end and back end because they're dealing with the same ecosystem, they're dealing with the same libraries in a lot of the ways, they're dealing with the same language. So in those cases, it even makes it easier also to make strict type interfaces between the front end and the back end. I have to mention though that one of the reasons why stuff like GraphQL and all these different kind of schema solutions have come around is basically to solve one of these problems, like where you have different languages across the back end and the front end. So you need some kind of type safety between the APIs. But still, I think that there are some advantages, especially when you combine JavaScript across the board.
I think Jonas had his hand up first, Mikkel. We'll go to him, but then I'm definitely coming to you.
Thanks. And yeah, I think it's a really good point you have, Kim, with the front end and back end being JavaScript and all. And I think basically what it comes down to is basically the issue that you brought up earlier, which it resolves within your HR department. Like, can you find the resources to do that? Because I do think that having a Node.js backend is a good option as well. But I think that there are a lot of people who specifies in backend development only, and they don't look that much into that yet. Not saying it won't happen, but I just think it's a movement in progress. But also worth mentioning with the logic backend as to having the logic in the front end. There's also you should also look into the security issues that could bring, because I know that some people tend to do very logic heavy front ends. But it is easier to exploit logic-heavy front ends, so just worth to keep in mind whenever you design your system.
Really good point. Yeah.
Mikkel?
Yeah. I think I sort of very fundamentally agree that like one of the advantages of using the same language on front end, I don't know, like middle end, at least sort of at the API layer when doing that is also the ability you have sort of as a developer to not be blocked by other people. Like you don't have to send, at least if it's something like GraphQL, or you have sort of these backend for the front end kind of frameworks, then what you're doing sort of as a front ender is kind of both ensuring that you can get like the data out of the API sort of in the shape that you want and use it for your components. And I think sort of the less that you have to start pinging other people who are experts in other frameworks, also sort of the more velocity you can have as like an individual developer or individual team. I would say that's also, I mean, sort of building on the point that Jonas had, that's also a thing that I think may be more of a concern, like in smaller places with less resources, where like if you're doing like startup or app or like simple web apps versus like more corporate system where there's a whole bunch of say like compliance things and security things that you may have to be more aware of. And then sort of another point that I got to thinking about whether like JavaScript is king, and I think I would modify that kind of to JavaScript as a target is king, where so TypeScript on top of TypeScript, basically more stuff on top of JavaScript. Rescript that I mentioned previously that compiles to JavaScript, PureScript, which compiles to JavaScript, I think offers some better developer experience while still being able to leverage all the things that JavaScript can interact with, basically run in browser, on phone, in Electron, and interface with a very large ecosystem.
Kim, come to you.
I just want to quickly add, I think JavaScript together with the JavaScript tool chain is really king. That's where it excels, because TypeScript is basically, part of the tool chain of JavaScript usually. And I would also say that, the package manager for, the package management for JavaScript is also one of the things I think excels really, because I've come from a C++ background where we use CMake and no official package manager. That's really hell to manage packages there. And I also used NuGet for .NET, and I still think that when you ask me, I think that Yarn or NPM is definitely superior in a lot of ways.
I love that. And just one more point I wanted to raise before we moved on to the next topic was talking about there the blurring of the lines between the front end and the back end. Mikkel put it nicely and said, "Is Middlestack developers going to come about?" What did you mean by that, Mikkel?
Well, I mean that I think, especially with something like GraphQL, where you have so you can sort of define your GraphQL schema in a lot of different ways. But I think if you're doing it right, then you're making like a very thin layer. Then basically your front end is a very thin layer, sort of on top of the data that comes back from your GraphQL API. So you have like very flexible and sort of rich types to basically like plug like pretty much straight into your components. And that also means that if you as a front-end developer are going to like implement some page that's going to show like some chats and then like an avatar sort of next to it, then by having a GraphQL instead of like some REST API, you can on the front end, you can sort of program your query so you get exactly the kind of data you want. But then you also need to have the some knowledge and some expertise in, okay, if like the email is not on the user type, then I need to know how to go into the GraphQL API to add that, or to add a type to a union to sort of cover these use cases. So you're kind of, and that is sort of traditionally sort of like backend type work, like this. You have your front end, then you have something that serves from your front end, and then you have sort of your actual backend, which may be like straight into the Node.js server that serves the API, but also maybe like a microservice thing like further on. And I think sort of working in the front end and like this API layer thing is powerful, a powerful skill and useful again sort of for the velocity you can have like as a individual developer or in a team.
I love it, guys. Well, let's move on to the next topic. We're talking about the future, of course, of open source front end software, so we do need to answer that question in a sense. Now, I know from speaking with all of you, and I know from doing recruitment, that TypeScript seems to be coming up a lot more. Is it taking over from JavaScript? We know it's part of the tool chain. We're touching on a bit about Rescript too. Nikki, I want to come to you first. What's been your experience?
I think definitely that TypeScript has will slowly become a standard. I don't see many like pure JavaScript projects being started up. It's always TypeScript. So existing code bases will slowly be written to TypeScript if you want to maintain it, and all new projects will, in a larger degree than before, be written in TypeScript. And yeah, it's clear they definitely won the so to speak type language wars. I remember a few years ago there was a toss-up whether it would be TypeScript or Flow was a thing. Also, Rescript or Reason, as it was called before. Although I guess that also serves some other use cases. So yeah, definitely, I see it's a valuable skill to have, because I do think it's going to be the future of JavaScript, basically.
Jonas, come to you.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that TypeScript is going to be the future of JavaScript, but I also do think that movement is due to some of the, I wouldn't say issues, but some of the hackiness that JavaScript has had, like the what's it called, rumor, or yeah, that's an issue I've heard about, at least, that all of these hacky things you can do in JavaScript, you see like funny issues where you take like an integer and then do a plus sign and then to a string and then just does concatenation, and you can do the same with like an integer and a string plus an integer and all of this stuff. And all of this stuff is getting like sorted out by doing TypeScript, because you have this strict types now, that so you don't question what you're doing when you're doing stuff. You don't get an output that you're not expecting, and I do think that's the way that we want to go. So you TypeScript resolves a lot of those issues. I also think it's a valid point that I think Denmark is a very heavily Microsoft-based country, and a lot of backends are like written in C#, comes from like very type-strong languages, and you want your front end to reflect this. So you want to be able to handle that, and you want to be able to have the same models that you do in the backend and the front end, saying, okay, I can validate my input, and all of that pros and cons that comes along with that. So maybe a bit more development time, because you need to sort everything out in that manner. But I do think that the debugging and you just creating less issues as you develop other stuff is well worth it.
Who's going next?
Can I just quickly like add to what Jonas said? I think it's a bit of a fallacy that you have to invest time in creating all your types, because in my mind it's actually an accelerator, because as soon as you have the types, whether it's hopefully not manually typed, but ideally it should come from some schema that you have, but it saves you so much in development time, because suddenly you have IntelliSense. So if you're typing user, then your IDE already knows what properties you can access and what types those are, and it will tell you when you're doing something that is wrong. So I do think that, yeah, it's an investment, but I think actually it does make you work faster from the beginning. I don't think there's like a time you put on top, because the savings are greater than the investment already from the start.
Awesome, Mikkel. I think you are next, and then we'll come to Kim.
Yeah, kind of actually the same kind of point that Nikki made, but maybe with some more concrete examples. Like, so Kim mentioned Prisma, which like generates types based on sort of the schema that you have. So like you run a command, and then you have all the types that you need in like on your backend already sort of generate and check for you. And if you do, at least if you do GraphQL, then you have code gen also on the front end. So so I think some of this extra work that you maybe used to have to do in TypeScript, or then also declaring like your ambient modules or whatever, that sort of falls away. Sort of as a plug, I still think TypeScript is not as good as it could be. There are some like cases where you can get sort of unsound TypeScript doesn't like check, like if you have like an array of numbers and then you get like some index out, it doesn't say, hey, this index might be undefined. If you have like so if you have like two functions, one that like takes that's type annotated as a string, and you call that from another function, then you still have to, like, so you call f takes a string and does something with it, and then g takes something and then calls f, then TypeScript still doesn't know that the thing that you call like g with is a string. So you're still doing, I think, more manual work in TypeScript that you would have to do it with if sort of was built better from the ground up, but also still think it's an improvement that's like it's miles better than JavaScript, plain JavaScript.
And I completely agree. I just think it's, as you said, it's a work in progress. I think everything gets better with better tooling, and I already think we've made it very far in regards to, as Nikki mentioned, like doing models in your front end is not always a manual process. It is sometimes, but with better tooling, you can automatically generate those and just work with those tools to smoothen out the whole process, and in the end just have a product which is so much better and safer for the user to use and safer for your organization and all of that.
Yeah, and I think sort of an extra little like just to add on this is that even if you're then hiring someone who comes like from a pure JavaScript background, don't know all of these tools, I think there's also a benefit in like onboarding, because you have like way more guardrails against someone who doesn't know this code base sort of by heart, by having worked for us for a couple of years, who can still know that if I like return this, if I change this function somewhere, then it tells me all the places that it breaks, instead of having to remember, oh yeah, like 2 years ago there was a bug where we did this, so I have to be like extra careful.
Hi, Kim. You had your hand up there. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, so I would really like to comment on the question: why are we moving to TypeScript? Because I actually came from Seago, where we use Google Closure, which is basically a type checking solution, just doing it through the JavaScript comments. So it's basically a system where you annotate your functions and classes and whatever in JSDoc, which basically solves the problem about type checking to an extent. One of the things that I liked about doing it that way is that the code you write in your IDE can actually be the code that runs directly in your browser, whereas TypeScript is a completely superior language to JavaScript in some ways, so you can't just run TypeScript directly in your browser. You need some kind of tool chain in between. There are some good sides, there's some bad sides to that, but what I think is really important to talk about when we talk about TypeScript is not only to talk about type checking, but also, the move towards something like metaprogramming or something like this. And you can actually express yourself in a lot of ways in TypeScript that I think is very different from, the different type-safe languages we have in the rest of the world, like let's say C# or C++ or whatever, because TypeScript really goes type checking down to the value level. You can basically say that you not only want a string as a type for this function argument. You actually want to restrict it to only be these 4 different strings. So in a lot of other languages, you would end up with having to make an enum or something somewhere else in the code and whatever, and then use that type. But TypeScript actually allows you to do some very specific type constraints in place, which I really love and which I use every day. And it also, allows you to compose basically like types, like unions, for example. You can basically make a type and say this type should be either this type or this type or this type. So you can basically do some very complex compositions of these types, not only limited to making a class or a structure, but you can actually, make a type out of a certain set of values. That's one of the things that I think makes TypeScript really excel, which is some of the features that I don't find is just as easy to do just with Closure, or I think it's called Flow.js, another type checker for JSDoc based typing. And at the end, I definitely agree on that. When you have something like TypeScript instead of JavaScript, there's a lot of cases where the IDE has an easier time knowing which kind of types you can input into that function you're trying to call. Whereas in JavaScript, in raw JavaScript, I experience a lot of the times that the IDE tries to guess in some cases what you want in there as a parameter type.
Fantastic. And one point I did want to move to, I think it kind of sums up really well what we've talked about today and kind of spoke through. Mikkel pointed me towards a tweet by a guy called Gerge Aros, who's the author of Pragmatic Engineer. And he highlighted really that he's observing more startups are choosing TypeScript in their tech stack. So it's Node.js with TypeScript on the back end, React TypeScript on the front end, and GraphQL as the API. My question to you is this what we're going to see more of going forward, what we spoke of today? And is it going to be easier to hire and pick it up as a developer? It's open to the floor, so whoever wants to jump in, please take it away.
If I can just jump in, I think it's a good point with having the full stack be more united with one technology, say TypeScript in this case. I think it's easier to both recruit and teach people and all of that. So I do think it comes with a great range of benefits, but I also think it may be dangerous to limit your entire staff to only doing one stack, because then you won't find all of the new stuff happening everywhere else, because the IT world is developing so quickly and it pops up new frameworks, new programming languages, all of those new technologies popped up everywhere, and they all do a bunch of different things really great, but they all have each use case. So I do think we'll see more of the TypeScript stack in the future, yes. But I just saying this out to everyone, like, be careful not to only go with this stack and not investigate your options in regards to, okay, everybody's saying TypeScript and Node backend is the stuff, but if it really just makes more sense for you to do a C# or a Python backend, do that, or do a microservice backend, so you could have like a portion of it be TypeScript, a portion of it be Python, and a portion of it be C#, because we have those options today with all of the great technologies that we have.
Kim, we'll come to you next.
I think that I had two target groups in mind where the answer really differs in every way, because when I'm thinking of people coming from, in my case, for example, from the .NET world or from C++ or some other kind of type safe language, I think it might be easier to transition to TypeScript in a lot of ways, because you're familiar with typing, you're familiar with that you have a compiler, and you're familiar with that the compiler helps you in a lot of ways, which I think that might make migrating from some of the languages easier. Where I think that there's a big difference is that for newcomers to programming, I was a helping teacher on my local university for a lot of years ago. And one of the things that I experienced with people having a hard time understanding when they enter into programming is a concept around compiling, that you had to have a tool chain that basically, compiles. The only thing that they could understand was that you had a text editor that you wrote code in, and then they basically just expected the code to run, right? But what they had a hard time grasping is that you have a whole tool chain helping you, compiling and making machine code and whatever. Another thing is also that type safety can also add something to the learning curve. I mean, in JavaScript, it's really forgiving when you write, some very small pieces of code that might not, run the way you expected, but still, I think there's some psychology in that when you have a compiler telling you that there's a syntax error somewhere, and you think, well, it's just a mathematical expression. Why doesn't this work, right? It's very easy to punish that newcomer developer, whereas in JavaScript I think it's more forgiving, and it might be a little bit easier for newcomers to learn. So I think there's two different cases to this.
I think that's true. Also, I think there's a reason why. So, say Python is also a sort of very popular programming language, sort of introductory language, because it has sort of the same. Like, you just start writing, and then you get like an exception somewhere, or something come out weird, but there's not very much sort of friction up front. I think that, to an extent, also has to do at least with the state that TypeScript's type system is in now, where like in most type bases, in most code bases, you kind of have to do type annotations everywhere. Whereas with something like with something like Rescript or like the early iterations, I mean, if you use something as a string, then it's going to be like a string all the way through and tell you exactly like this is not a string. Whereas if you use like the Typescript compiler, then you get like huge error messages sort of that are very difficult. And basically what you have to do is like scroll down to the bottom and then you go, okay, this is a string, but you're expecting an int. But it's not very ergonomic, I think, for the developing experience, not as ergonomic as it could be, and that it sometimes is in languages that don't have like the JavaScript legacy.
Spot on with the point about the error messages, because they can become long and really hard to read sometimes.
Yeah.
Some great points, guys. Well, a bit of fun before we get into answering some of the questions that have come through. I want to quickly go around the room, starting with Nikki, and find out what's your favorite web stack to use.
Well, everything basically that we've been talking about today. So I love working with React and TypeScript, and I try to do that both front end and back end. Usually I work with, at least when I'm starting new projects, with Next.js, which allows me to basically very easily do TypeScript on the back end, and so there's no there's really no distinction whether or not it's running on the client or the server. And sometimes I forget when I'm writing code like, wait, isn't this supposed to be running on the server? That means I don't have a DOM, for example. And in terms of like the backend itself, other than Next.js, I kind of I look into what the project itself is about, because it might be that it makes sense to have a GraphQL API. It might make sense to do serverless, and in some cases maybe like some Prisma stuff. But anyway, regardless of what I pick, it is something that is has strong types and is like it's something that I can use. I don't see myself go out and learn Rust, for example, because I don't need to. I know TypeScript, and so that's what I'm sticking to. TypeScript all the way.
Fantastic. Mikkel, we'll come to you next.
So this is going to be like very opinionated. So if I got to choose sort of building like a greenfield project from the start, then maybe branching out later to other things as needed. But it would be Rescript with React 18 on the front end. It would be GraphQL, a Relay API, a GraphQL Relay API. It would be it would be GraphQL Yoga and Pothos and Prisma on the back end. And I think sort of a huge part of it is that for me at least, like the development experience is very, very good. Also would have to be sort of VS Code. So in that ecosystem, the Rescript Relay ecosystem, the ecosystem around that, there are very good code lenses and actions for VS Code. There's a router that sort of shows you, oh, if you're on this route, or like this route uses these components, or this component are used in these different routes, and there's a server-side rendering built in, and that gives me sort of personally like a lot of speed and safety as a developer that for the initial parts of a project at least are going to be, if you're building a prototype or trying to find product market fit, all these startup-y buzzword that lets you get to somewhere really quickly. And then I think Jonas is correct that then you might, as you scale, run into specific problems that needs other tools later on, and then you start thinking about spinning that like a part of your backend out into a different service that then opens up again what technology you can use, whether that's like your RPCing or passing messages around or whatever it is. But for the but anything that I start from scratch would be very much would be this set of tools and tool chains.
Fantastic. And Jonas, we'll come to you next, mate.
Yeah, cool. So for now, I thoroughly enjoy playing around with Angular, and on top of that with the RxJS. I think it's a really nice framework, but I do think it's a nice framework for building large-scale, scalable applications. If you want to do like massive applications with lots of modules, lots of pages and whatnot. Actually, for my like own hobby projects that I do at home, now I'm purely talking front end because that's today's topic. For my own projects, I like to poke around in React because I do think it's a lot quicker building stuff in React, but it does come with a bit more. You have to be aware as a developer, otherwise you may just have a component just running completely off, going like 1,000 lines of code and whatnot. Whereas in Angular and all of that, it sort of just makes it easier for the developer seeing, okay, this doesn't make sense to put in here. I have to build a new component and whatnot. Whereas in React, it's just, okay, I can build everything in a single file and just fire away. So yeah, hence why I enjoy doing it for if I'm testing stuff, but if I want to build something that I want to deliver for a customer or something, I would actually prefer Angular.
Can I ask a quick follow-up to that? Would you say that's because like Angular enforces like these sort of nice separations, whereas like you can do those separations in React, but it's like you're not forced to do them. So you get like some guardrail from that.
Yeah, exactly. So already just in the layout of Angular, you have your like template file and your TypeScript file, and React you just have your one, say, TypeScript or JavaScript file. So already there you have this separation between some logic and some visual stuff, and just that. And then if you bring new people to the project, it's a lot easier for them to see, okay, this is the approach, and not just firing huge components. So yeah.
Fantastic. And Kim, just quickly come to you before we get to at least one of these questions. What's your favorite web stack?
So first of all, it's important for me to say that I have a very complicated background, because I've been in doing C++ in the game side, and have been doing .NET as well in the tooling side, and I've come onto front end later. So I've tried out a lot of different ways of working, a lot of different stacks, so it might be a lot of religion to me, but for me, I think one thing is very important first to emphasize on is that JSX is basically a concept that React uses. That means that you can combine, markup and JavaScript. There is a lot of different, tools and frameworks that can use JSX to build, UI. You have React, you have Solid.js. There's even frameworks where you can build, games using JSX. But one of the things that I really love about JSX is that you basically decouples in a lot of ways your UI from a specific framework, because React is basically only providing you with a virtual DOM that basically translates JSX into actual presentable DOM for the browser. So for me, I think that I prefer to have a stack divided into smaller pieces, because let's say, for example, that I want to upgrade React. I only need to upgrade the stuff that actually directly depends on React, and if I stick to my solid principles a lot of the way, and I have architected my software properly, I think that it's easier to to bump up to new versions from different libraries when you have smaller libraries, because that you only have smaller pieces of code that depends on these libraries. No offense to you, Jonas. I've been working with Angular as well, whereas Angular, I would consider Angular a framework, whereas React is more like a library, because Angular is really fantastic in the ways that it comes with a whole package for a lot of things. It also makes it easier, that if you have, want to hire an Angular developer, you basically know that this Angular developer, if he says he can Angular, he can do a lot of things, because Angular has a certain way of doing stuff. And that's a really good tool for making, your code across a huge, enterprise project consistent, because it has certain ways of doing things. That's one of the pitfalls with, let's say, choosing React, because it's only a library. Then you usually combine it with a lot of different, library state management and whatever not. But to the question, what is my preferred stack? I would definitely say that I would go with either Next.js or React or Solid.js, at least something that is JSX based. I would definitely go for Apollo, both on the server and the client side, because I think it eases a lot of the state management. It eases the communication, the GraphQL communication, all that kind of stuff. And then at the end, I would definitely go for Prisma. That means Node.js backend, because I really love how easy it is to integrate, Apollo, Prisma, and the whole GraphQL system together. And I think it's really easy to iterate on. I would say that it's really in its infant stage still. This whole kind of Prisma GraphQL thing. So you might run into some small problems here and there, but I think it's definitely worth the time in investing in it, because it's making a lot of stuff so much easier that I had to problems with in the past, especially on the ASP.NET side. So I definitely would vote for JSX combined with Apollo and Prisma.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, I did want to ask one of the questions from Metin Ahmed, but obviously we're going to run out of time in just a second. So what I'm going to do, if you're listening, Metin, is ask all the guys to perhaps give an answer off the record, and we'll definitely get that out to you. But just before we finish, I really want to take this time to thank Nikki, to thank Mikkel, Kim and Jonas for making this webinar so fantastic today. Please reach out to them if you have any further questions. They're all experts in what they do, and they're all great guys and lovely to speak to. If you wanted to listen to this webinar again, or you weren't able to listen to the full thing, head to our podcast. There's the Evolution Exchange. You can find both this webinar. We did a webinar last week on freelancing in Denmark, but there's a whole load of podcasts over the Nordic region, Sweden and Denmark, that make for fantastic listening. But thank you guys for your time today, and I'd love to do an extension of this perhaps in the new year, because we've still got so much to cover. All right.
We'll have
all the
best.
Thanks for
8
having
major
me.
releases by then.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.